Happy Sabbath. I've been, over the last 6 months or so, when I have special feature time, I've been taking a look at some of the Old Testament characters. I hope you're not getting too bored with that format because I'm planning to stick with it until I'm out of office, so hopefully that won't be too burdensome for you. So today I'm looking at the character of Naaman. And I want you to take a look at three particular characters. I'm just going to kind of go through the story and let you glean some points from the story. So first we'll look at the witness of the little maid, the little Hebrew maid. Secondly, the interaction between Elisha and Naaman. And then thirdly, the witness of Gehazi. So as you know, Naaman was a prominent captain in the Syrian army. And during this time in Israel's history, there was constant border skirmishes going on between Syria and Israel. And these had taken place particularly ever since the death of Ahab a few years previously. And primarily, Syria was the one that was coming out on top of these conflicts. And during one of them, there were a number of captives taken, and one of them was a little Hebrew girl who ended up being placed in the home of Naaman and his wife. And her job was to serve Naaman's wife within the home. And so I want to take a look first at her witness. So during her time in captivity, of course, she was there all alone, and she was faithfully working in the home, but also being a powerful witness during that time to Naaman and his wife. And I think much like the example of Joseph when he was in captivity, or if you look at Daniel and the three Hebrews, they all served God faithfully within their job as slaves, but also none of them were willing to bend the knee to the heathen gods of the time. And so when Captain and Lady Naaman were saying their prayers, the little maid stayed true to God, and she did not worship the heathen gods with them. And as she was serving there in the home, the Spirit of Prophecy tells us that her sympathies were aroused for Captain Naaman, that as we know, although he was a prominent man, he had leprosy, which was really considered a scourge in that time and was a very disfiguring disease. We know now that leprosy is actually curable. There are treatments available now, but during that time, this was really quite a social blight and a stigma, and so it was quite a reflection and was really a curse on Naaman. And so the little maid said to Lady Naaman, "If only my lord Naaman were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would recover him of his leprosy." So Naaman set out for Samaria on the word of the little maid. And with him he took 10 talents of silver, 6,000 pieces of gold, and 10 changes of clothing to offer to the prophet there in Samaria. But he also took a letter with him from the king of Syria to the king of Israel. And in it the king of Syria said, "Behold, I send my servant Naaman, that you may recover him of his leprosy." And of course at that time there was no cure for leprosy, and so the king of Israel was taking this really as a trick, because he said, what will happen when Naaman comes to me, and of course I can't heal him of his leprosy? Then the king of Syria is going to take this as an opportunity to invade my country, and it will all have been a trick. So Elisha heard of the king of Israel's distress about this letter, and he sent word to the king saying, "Send him to me. Let him come to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel." So secondly, we'll take a look at the witness of Elisha and the interaction that he had with Naaman there. So Naaman comes down to Elisha, and he comes with horsemen. He has all of these lavish gifts, and he's prepared to do whatever penance is necessary in order to be healed. So he's expecting some fanfare to take place, being the prominent man that he is. So when he comes to Elisha's house, Elisha doesn't even come and greet him. In fact, he sends just a messenger out with the message, "Go and wash 7 times in the Jordan, and you will be clean." So Naaman is feeling pretty put out by this time because here he is, this influential person in Syria, and he's used to being treated with deference. And when he goes with all of his show of force, he has his men with him, he has these gifts, the prophet doesn't even greet him. He's expecting that at least the prophet would come out and raise his hands to heaven and, perhaps wave his hands over the affected areas and, do some sort of incantation, something that would, be a show. He's kind of expecting the VIP treatment. So he is feeling put out by all this, and he decides to turn and go home. He says, I can go and bathe in my own rivers, which are much better than the dirty Jordan, so why would I do this? So he turns to leave, but his men convince him to give it a try. They entreated him by saying, if the prophet had asked you to do some great thing, of course you would have done it. So how much easier is this? And besides, what's the worst thing that could happen? You go home a leper, you're already there. So Naaman relents. He decides to go down and give it a try. So he goes down to the Jordan, and as we know from the story, he dips 7 times in the Jordan River, and he comes up clean. He's healed of his leprosy, completely free. So he's thrilled. He goes racing back to Elisha, he and his men, and he kneels before Elisha. Elisha actually comes out this time and says, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. And he offers Elisha the extravagant gifts that he's brought with him, as was really customary in that time. But Elisha explains that it wasn't him that provided the healing, it was God. And he makes very clear, saying, as the Lord God liveth, I will receive none. He would receive no gifts, no payment of any kind for the healing that the Lord had provided to Naaman. So Naaman asks for one more thing. I thought this was interesting. I'd forgotten about this when I read through the story the first time. He offers for 2 mules' burden of dirt, of earth, to take with him, because he wants to be able to serve the God of Israel on Israeli soil. Now, of course, he didn't quite get it right. We know that you can worship God anytime, anywhere. But Elisha grants his requests. He takes the dirt with him, and off he goes. Again, Elisha refusing to take any credit for the healing that God had placed on Naaman. But then we come to Gehazi, the third part of the story. Gehazi had been Elisha's faithful servant for many years, but the spirit of prophecy tells us that during that time he was always drawn by wealth and prominence in material things. And, you have to know that being a servant of a prophet is probably not too great in terms of wealth or influence. So he has given up a lot in his life. But when he sees his master refuse the gifts that Naaman is freely offering, and besides, this is their enemy, he really just can't take it. So he decides, as Naaman is leaving, that he's going to pursue Naaman and go after him and get some of that wealth for himself. And initially, we're tempted to sort of sympathize with Gehazi. Now, he was a likable character, I think, initially, but there are some serious points where he transgressed here. So, firstly, he dishonored God's servant Elisha by directly going against what Elisha had said. So Elisha had specifically said that he would take no gifts or payment for the healing that had been provided by God. And secondly, he defiled God's work by lying. So we know that he catches up with Naaman, he stops his chariot, and he concocts this story of 2 sons of the prophets who have come to Elisha, and they're needing shelter, and they're needing some changes of clothes and a little money. So he asks for 1 talent of silver and 2 changes of clothes. Really not all that bad, right? So, of course, Naaman is thrilled to oblige. He already wanted to give the gifts. So, in fact, he gives 2 talents of silver and 2 changes of clothes and sends Gehazi off. But, I think where the real problem came in, firstly, he lied, went against what Elisha had said. He was sort of like a televangelist who is preying on those who are willingly giving. And so he concocts this story while all the time he was planning to use the gifts that were intended to be for God for his own selfish purposes. So then he goes back, of course, he hides the clothes. He comes back to Elisha, who confronts him immediately and says, "Where have you been?" He directly asks him. And Gehazi says, "Nowhere." He had his chance to make it right, but he didn't. So he out and out lies again to the prophet of God. Now, oftentimes when we're caught red-handed, kids are great for this. They'll say, "Nope, wasn't me, didn't have anything to do with it." We create a cover-up because of our own pride. So Elisha knew the whole time, of course, what Gehazi had been up to. And he says to him, "Went not my heart with thee when the man turned from his chariot to greet thee? Is this the time to receive money, or olive yards, or vineyards, or sheep, or oxen? The leprosy of Naaman shall cling to thee and thy seed forever." And from that moment on, Gehazi left there a leper. It's interesting that Sister White goes on to talk about that even generations afterwards, Naaman was remembered. In Luke 4:27, Luke says, "Many lepers were in Israel at the time of Elisha the prophet, but none was cleansed, save Naaman of Syria." So Naaman was remembered generations later, but Gehazi we don't hear any more about. So I want to let's remember these lessons, the lesson of the little maid and her faithfulness, the lesson of Elisha and his unselfish attitude and the way he refused to take credit for God's miracle. And then also the example that Gehazi gives us for his disservice and the disobedience that and the consequences that reaped. Thank you.
Good morning. As we get ready for our church service, I'd like for you to read all of your announcements in the bulletin. They're there for a reason. Sometimes I think we forget to read them, but they are there. And one of them I would like to call attention to, and I've been asked to mention, is the planning session for Vacation Bible School. In the summertime, it seems like every church in the community has a Vacation Bible School. Somewhere over the last couple of years, ours kind of went that way. So there are people that would like to get this started again, and they would like to have a planning session, and that is Sabbath, which I guess, would be 2 weeks from today, March the 27th. And so please remember that and try to attend and help out. We've got some good ideas. You don't have to come to the Vacation Bible School and really work at it. Just come to the planning session and, give them their ideas, and maybe someone will lead out and take over. The other announcements are there. I'd like to call your attention to those. And then time now, to start our services. Psalm 65 tells us that happy are the people that God chooses to live in his sanctuary. It says, if we live there, we are filled with blessings from his house. That's why we're here today, to be filled with blessings from his house. Time now for our services.